Okay, so let me do our official welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is our June Trauma Sick meeting. And wow, I can hardly believe we've been meeting for 8 years, since 2016, since our Congress in Vienna. We're getting old, together. Interesting. Comforting, by the way. Okay, so I have the honor to welcome my dear friend, Marsha from New York City, wonderful, talented schema therapist. And I met Marsha centuries ago, working in the peer group supervision in Jeff Young's institute. And well, I realized that she's a very warm person and really very talented schema therapist. So I learned a lot from her. And well, let me go now to the formal introduction. Well, she began her career as a schema therapist, working at the Cognitive Therapy Center of New York, the Schema Therapy Institute, directly by Jeffrey Young, Dr. Jeffrey Young. She's an advanced certified schema therapist in adult individual schema therapy and child-adolescent schema therapy. And she's also a certified developmental somatic psychotherapist, informed by the work of Dr. Ruela Frank, founder of DSP. Afterwards, Marsha, you can tell us what DSP stands for. And by her years as a professional dancer, Marsha incorporates movement and somatic techniques in her practice of schema therapy. Amazing trajectory, personal and professional. Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. DSP is developmental somatic psychotherapy.
Right.
That was created by Dr. Ruela Frank, who's a Gestalt therapist. But I'm glad you and your bodies came here this morning, so we can all have a discussion about why is it so important to focus on the body. So just to get started, how about all of us sit in a comfortable position with our feet flat on the floor, feeling the weight going through our feet from the toes to the heels. See if you can relax your feet into the floor. Now, from there, as you have a little push into the ground, we're going to call it the ground, even though it's your wooden floor. See if you can locate sitting right up on your sits bones, those two little bumps at the bottom of your butt, okay? And as you do that, let's see if you can find support wherever you are in the back of your body. Sometimes we neglect the back of our body. And sitting comfortably in that chair, let your arms rest on your desk or the arms of the chair. Your hands are relaxed. Jaw, cheekbones. And let's take some deep abdominal breathing. And I'll give you a slow count of 4. We're breathing in, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4. Do it on your own, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4. And as you inhale, you can think you're inhaling calmness, you're exhaling anxiety. And you can keep the breathing going and imagining you're inhaling calmness, you're exhaling anxiety. Okay. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. So when we start as schema therapists, when we start imagery rescripting, we almost always start with deep breathing. This seems to be what most people do, right? When you start imagery, you start with deep breathing and you get the patient, you get the client grounded, right? We always use this term, we have to get the client grounded. So what does that mean, actually? Why do we do this? We do this mainly because we're trying to set the client up in a place of safety and security. So if we allow that client to pause, to adjust, as we adjust with them, as we are resonating kinesthetically with them, we're setting up an environment of safety, of security, of feeling the ground underneath you, which can provide a feeling of stability. And that's what grounding is. Because I know that, sometimes when we talk about the body and we talk about these exercises, it all sounds very vague, but actually, this is the purpose of grounding. And as you go along with your client, if you keep up doing these simple movements, these simple exercises, you will see a change over time. So, look, we all have bodies, right? We're not heads on plates yet, maybe in 10 years, but we know that there's no separation. We have the term mind, body. So we know from the trauma work that we're familiar with, whether it's Peter Levine, or Pat Ogden, and the beauty of schema therapy, right? The beauty of schema therapy is that it's an integration of the best pieces of various models, right? So, that's Jeff Young's brilliance, is that we have attachment theory, we have the influence of the British object relations people, then we have the Gestalt influence, and then we have the CBT influence, and it's all intertwined to provide this beautiful treatment model of working with all kinds of people, whether they have traumatic pasts or not. So the same with, we bring in whatever we know and integrate it in a way that's useful and provides an opportunity for us to meet the client where they are and get their need, help them, guide them to get their needs met. So we walk through the world with our bodies, right? And we meet the world with our bodies. So paying attention to what occurs in us and what occurs in that space between us and the client is extremely beneficial. So I studied with Dr. Ruella Frank, who's a Gestalt therapist, and I'm still learning this, but I want to, in a little bit, I want to introduce you to the 6 fundamental movements that Ruella identified that happen from birth and continue throughout our whole life. And these are movements that happen simultaneously. Now, we use those 6 fundamental movements diagnostically. And if we can observe these movements and gestures in our clients, we're going to get a read on their developmental history. So let me go back right now to creating the environment, since all of you are trauma specialists, creating the environment of security, of balance, of safety, and of relatedness, and the grounding, which I really suggest that you do before you do imagery rescripting, because of the reasons that I mentioned before. And I also think that it helps put the client at ease, if they agree to do imagery rescripting. And, to pay attention to the breath, which I'm sure you all do when you're looking at your client, right? When you notice, is there constriction through the upper body? Is there a feeling of being bound muscularly? Is there a freedom in the client's posture and movement? Is there a dynamic of movement that goes up and down, etc.? All of these subtleties, give you information. So, we also want to pay attention not only to the breath, but to tone of voice. What is tone telling us as we hear the client speak? Does tone match what's happening in the body, etc.? Does tone match the affect? So really becoming more in tune with all of the senses, first within ourselves, and then fine-tuning your resonance with the client. So when you start with a grounding exercise, and I'll show you some other ones, you're helping to create a boundary. You're creating a boundary for yourself, first and foremost, so that when you're grounded, as you begin a session, you're really setting yourself up to be in your healthy adult. And you're creating a safe boundary for the client as well. Many clients that we work with have issues. Their boundaries are flaccid, or they're loose, or they're non-existent. So setting yourself up in this way is creating, once again, a model for how I can be within myself and how I can be with you. That I can be here with you without crossing over a boundary that could be threatening or frightening. So as I'm going along, just ask me questions, please, if something isn't clear or it sounds too vague, okay? All right. So anyway, what we want to do in therapy, of course, is understand, and what I love about schema therapy is that we focus on the therapy relationship. We want to know what's happening in that space between us and the client, right? And we're hoping that we can begin to resonate. We call it attunement, right? In schema therapy, we want to have a sensitive attunement to the client. And in that way, we can understand what needs weren't met and how do we go about in helping that client have their needs met. So we're hoping to see the patterns, right? These are the schemas. We're hoping to identify the themes that come up in that client's history and life, from childhood into adulthood. But we also, if we can identify some of the kinesthetic patterns that we feel ourselves, then we can help the client go a little deeper, and we can get important information for ourselves. So we're hoping that, through this, through looking at the body, through working with the body, we can encourage and see a sense of openness that could possibly help the client recall memories, recall feelings. And then from there, we hope to help them have a vocabulary to express whatever it is that we're feeling. I know that you've all had clients who say, I don't have feelings, or I don't know. If you say, what are you feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling. Well, that's actually something. That's something to make an intervention with. That what is the I don't knowing? where do we go with something like that? But when we have a client who has difficulty, it could be the most brilliant client, right? But they have difficulty expressing what it is. What is the meaning that's coming through? And they don't know. I can tell you that if you start with the body, then the process gets engendered. So what I usually do with clients who have this paucity of vocabulary is I ask them, as you might, where do you feel this in your body? Where in your body is this coming up? Now, often when I am going over schemas with a client, I will ask them, where is that emotional deprivation in your body? What does it look like? Very often people will say it feels like a big hole. Well, that's so descriptive, right? Here we go. The person who didn't really know how they felt or couldn't describe it, now they're giving you a visual image. It's like a big hole. And, we know when we're working with our clients with personality disorder, they don't have to have personality disorders. Many people have that intense sense of emptiness, and now it's being described as a big hole. I'll often continue with that. What does it look like? Does it have a color? Does it move around? Does it stay in one place? What does that emotional deprivation feel like now in your body? So if the client has difficulty expressing that, I've learned this from Ruella, is that I often will give qualities to the client, and that helps them focus in on a deeper level of what's happening. So I'll say, what does that feel like in your body? You have this big hole, and inside that hole is all of those years of emotional deprivation. What does that feel like physically to you? And so I would say, is it light? Is it dark? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it fizzy? Is it solid? Is it bound? Is it free? I just keep going until they attach to something, some kind of descriptor, and then we go from there. So in that hole, even though it's a big gaping hole, you feel very tight. Show me where it is that you feel very tight. Because we know that with the shallow breathing, when the client is encased in fear and shame, then muscles get bound, muscles get constricted. And these can be lifelong patterns. So this is how, this is not what Ruella Frank does. I want to be clear. She uses her 6 fundamental movements, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute, diagnostically. And I think that's a really great process. And she's a Gestalt therapist, and I'm not. Maybe some of you have that training. I don't. I am a transformational chair work therapist, but not a Gestalt therapist. And in modern Gestalt, chair work is not really used anymore, as you probably know. But anyway, so I'm using this as a schema therapist. So I want to be clear. I'm using this information and the information that I get in my body sitting with a client I'm using this to discuss lifelong maladaptive schemas, patterns, and modes. So none of this is a prescription. Like, you wouldn't look at somebody and say, oh yes, well, everybody who is defective and has shame looks like, sits down like this. We can't generalize. Many people do, right? We can look at posture, we can look at gait, we can look at the way that the spine and the core and the pelvis is holding up a person's body, and we can get a lot of information by looking. You know, if we look, I always ask a client to stand and to walk, and I'll observe them. And I walk with them, and then I ask them to walk, and I explain to them, I'm just looking to see, you know, what's going on in your body. If I can get some information to see how you're walking, how you're holding yourself, you can really see where people are held. But moving, excuse me for my ADD, but we will go right back to the 6 fundamental movements. Okay, so the 6 fundamental movements that begin immediately, they even begin in the womb, they all happen and work together, and they have to do with the interactive nature of a relationship, right? So when we have an infant, there's no infant unless there's the other. Okay, so the 6 fundamental movements are yielding with, pushing against, pushing back, reaching, grasping, pulling, and releasing. So yielding with is being able to take in, is being able to give oneself to the other and receive from the other. Make sense? That's yielding, yielding into. And it has to, a lot of it has to do with trust. So when you have clients who have huge mistrust, abuse, then you might look and see what's happening. Is there any point of yield? Is there any yielding in my relationship? What's happening between us in the moment as we work on this person's issues? And, you know, obviously, you know, we work very slowly with people who have had trauma in their lives. So none of this is like we're identifying to the client, I see that you're not really yielding. You know, this is for us. This is for our observations to try and have a picture of what happened before and how these patterns, like schemas, become very entrenched in a person's movement, and how these restrictions of movement affect a person's restriction of emotion. And what can we do about it? So with yielding, it has to do with trust and safety. How do I feel safe enough? How do I feel safe that I can give myself to you and also receive from you? And when we have those clients who often will say, you know, this isn't working, you know, like you're doing everything that you can think of, right, to help this person, but it's like this chronic, nothing works for me. You know, this isn't really helping. You know, maybe I should go on to my, you know, 25th therapist now and, you know, repeat this whole pattern over again. We can see that so much of this has to do with the fact that in that person's life, there was probably very little reliability, very little predictability or consistency. So then we can see that in certain postural holdings. You know, we can see that in their movement. So let's go on to pushing. What is pushing against? So pushing against, if you think of a baby, like if you go back to Mahler's, you know, looking at development and around 5 months when the baby pushes against the caregiver or the mother, and there's the first semblance of this is me and that's you, pushing against. So pushing against is really about the beginning of separating while including the other person. So it's pushing against, and then feeling the push back from the other. So let's say it's really determined by the pushback from the other person. I'm going to give you an example with an infant when I go through all of these six developmental fundamental movements. So is the pushback soft or is it hard? Is it abrupt? Is it gradual? So when we push back, then you have a sense of feeling yourself, of knowing that you see the other and that something exists between you and the other. Make sense? Please ask me questions if this is like, what are you really talking about? So, if you know Mahler and you know the psychological birth of the human infant, at this point, that's really the realization of me and what's not me. So looking at these movements, you can see is like, what is an issue that you're looking for? So an issue would be for the client is, can I be different than you and I can still be with you? And we have so many clients, right, who they have a life of merging with the other, and the fear of rejection is very intense. So can I be me and still be with you? Or do I have to produce something else for you to accept me, for you to love me? Am I lovable? So, can I be the pushing against? It's almost like, can I be separate without losing you? So these are very early, right? These are pre-verbal kinds of movements, and they stay with us, just like schemas stay with us until we look at the theme of someone's life. We look at the trajectory to see what didn't occur and what is the possibility here for this person. So the next thing is reaching for.